Hello everyone, back to you in today's first video. So we're doing the autumn forecast of 2016 for today's first video. We're going to combine the models that I've been looking at over the past few months, past 3 months, with the analogues that we've been looking at over the past few months, and we're going to attempt to come up with a forecast for the autumn of 2016 in the United Kingdom. Later on today, there'll be a little sneak peek for the winter of 2016-2017, because of course the autumn updates are ending today. The bandwagon then rolls on to the next season, and the next season is winter. So we're going to begin to think about the winter from next weekend at Gazzo, and start doing those winter updates on a week-by-week basis throughout the autumn. It all kicks off next week, and as a way of just getting you in the mood a bit, I thought I would do a little sneak peek for winter. Just looking at a few models really later on today. So that'll be coming up this afternoon. Just say the autumn 2016 update will be placed onto the autumn updates and forecast page later on. There'll be a written summary that goes with it, so you can't watch the video only one go. It shouldn't be overly long, but if you can't watch it only one go, don't worry, it will be placed on the autumn forecast page later on today. Well, before I get on with that, just to say about the ads at Gazzo, there's links to articles on all of the pages. Have a browse through widgets and click through the links. You'll be helping us to pay for the website. Thanks very much for doing that. There's video ads on most of the pages, which open up content when you watch them, they close back up again. Does all help to pay for Gazzo, so thanks so much for getting involved. And thanks for doing that. Just going to start off with the Apec model, because when we did the last model update last week, we were short of a couple of models. We were short of Apec, and we should have Beijing Climate Centre. So I thought I'd just start the Apec. It has updated, and then we'll go on and have a look at the analogues. Of course, last week's model update very much went for an Atlantic-driven autumn. The idea was that we're going to have a lot of westerlies, but so a milder than average autumn was definitely being signalled. The models were a little bit confused about whether it's likely to be anticyclonic, so quite dry, or whether it would actually be quite wet and stormy. There was that confusion within model output, but westerlies rule was basically the theme from the last model update that we did last week. Just going to add the Apec model to that. Now, this is a collaboration of various weather agencies. I think they're mostly Southern Hemisphere based. So we've got the Australian Bureau of Meteorology in with this. We've also got the Korean model as well. I think Korean Met Agency. Probably the JMA is involved in this too. So it's a collaboration of various Met agencies. And this is 500 millibar height only from the Apec model for the autumn. This is taking us from September to November. The idea is that we've got above average heights generally to the south and west, and lower, not particularly below average, but below, lower than lower heights to the north. The jet streams coming through. So it's a continuation of all models that we were looking at last week, really, which is for an Atlantic-driven autumn. So the temperature anomaly is coming out above average, a milder than average autumn being predicted by Apec. Temperatures not very warm, but certainly on the warmer side of average. There's the scale down there. And in terms of the precipitation anomaly, that comes out near normal, perhaps to ever so slightly above average with precipitation. Again, there's the scale there. So pale green's a little bit above average. With precipitation, not a huge deviation, and it is a westerly Atlantic-driven autumn. So that all goes in line with the models we were looking at last week. There's all in agreement really for Atlantic-driven autumn. There's all signalling mild average temperatures, just differing about whether the Azores high would ridge up and keep us quite settled, or whether actually we'd have quite a wet and potentially even stormy autumn. So that's the quandary that the models have, but the broad signal was the same. So as well as the model updates, on 3 of those, we've also been looking at the analogues for this autumn. James Ackroyd, good friend James, I know James is going to be watching, so big thank you James for sending the analogues through again for this season. James has been looking at at ENSO conditions through the autumn and creating some analogues for us. Now remember, ENSO is the sea surface temperature anomalies in the Equatorial Pacific. So we've got Peru over here, we've got Indonesia over here, and well, we've been looking at either La Nina autumns, and La Nina is signalled by colder than average sea surface temperature anomalies through the Equatorial Pacific, or ENSO neutral autumns, which is where the sea surface temperature anomalies in the Equatorial Pacific are just hovering around average. So first of all, we dealt with autumns that were La Nina autumns. Autumns that had transitioned from El Nino. Remember, we had the big El Nino at the start of the year, Super Nino conditions at the start of the year. So we was looking at autumns that have gone from El Nino at the start of the year to La Nina by the autumn. And James broke these down into two periods. We've got pre-1950 and post-1950. So this is how the La Nina autumns before 1950, when you combine them all, and they go right the way back to 1878 and then through to 1942. But you combine all those autumns that have done the Nino to Nina flip. This is how it looks. A lot of northern blocking. It's quite a cold autumnal signal, really. And then a trough of low pressure. I have to change the colour. A trough of low pressure underneath it, which has the effect of blocking off the Atlantic. So they're fairly dry autumns, but quite chilly. Now, the autumns after 1950 that do this Nino to Nina flip. So they're La Nina autumns, but they've come out of an El Nino at the start of the year. And these are all after 1950. They look somewhat different. There is still areas of above average heights to the north, but actually the centre of that above average heights is just to the west of the UK now. So instead of being centred up over Greenland and the North Pole, actually now the autumn analogues are generally centering the high pressure, the ridge, just to the west of the UK. And we have this deep trough in over Scandinavia, which elongates down into Central Europe. It's a subtle difference, but it's important because it's nowhere near as blocked in terms of northern blocking, and it's generally more of an Atlantic driven signal for us. So the flow is going something a little bit like that, and the air generally is coming round from the Atlantic. So these are not desperately cold autumns. They are still quite dry because the Atlantic is still blocked off by the high pressure. So generally quite dry autumns overall. Excuse me. But largely Atlantic based with the origins of the air. So that's how the El Nino to La Nina autumns look. But what about the El Nino to ENSO neutral autumns? Because if we look at this map again, and if you saw last night's ENSO update, basically it looks like La Nina has failed, because whilst we have got this small, cooler, colder than average area sea surface temperature anomalies through the Equatorial Pacific, it's very weak. It's actually weakening. It's weakened from what we had in July, and even then it wasn't much of a signal. And the modelling is all suggesting that the rest of this year is just going to have ENSO neutral conditions. So what we did then, what James did, is had a look at all autumns that were ENSO neutral coming out of El Nino, and once you combine all the years, there's loads of them there too. Combined, go right way back into the 1800s and then through virtually to the modern day. And what we see is that combining all the autumns, we generally have a ridge out to west, so very similar to the La Nina autumns in some ways. A ridge centred just to the west of us and extending up towards Greenland with a trough over Scandinavia and going down in central parts of Europe. It still keeps things largely Atlantic based. But what we did discover, what James discovered, is that throughout these autumns that are ENSO neutral coming out of El Nino, there's lots and lots of variations to the theme. So he broke down the autumns into various scenarios. So this is how the autumns look, where we just have high pressure close to us. And these autumns go from 1897 all the way down to 2005. And what we see is that the ridge is generally centred to the west, and the trough is through Scandinavia, down in central parts of Europe. The air is Atlantic origin based, so it's not particularly cold. Fairly dry autumns, again, the scenery is there, be fairly dry, but overall not desperately cold because high pressure is generally to westwards, which keeps the flow of the Atlantic. That's the majority of autumns. We've got, out of all those years, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8 autumns that have, on average, high pressure close to the UK. Now, there are a few autumns that have northern blocking, and these are the autumns, the ENSO neutral autumns. We've got 1866, 1915, 1952, 1959, and 2003. So there's only 5 of them, but they show an area of above average heights more or less centred over the Arctic with a trough underneath it. And these are probably on average colder autumns in some ways. Still very dry because the Atlantic is being blocked off on average through these autumns. So not a huge amount of rainfall, but fairly dry autumns. But overall, they are a bit cooler because the high pressure is centred more to the north. And then, of course, there's also the Atlantic-driven autumns. Now, there's not many of these, but they are, in some ways, a little bit more representative of where we are right now because they're more modern years. So we've got 1978, 1983, and 1992. And these autumns tend to have low pressure to the north and high pressure down to the south. And we tend to bring the jet stream through the country rather like that. Again, quite dry autumns. That's the same throughout all of these, whether it's the El Nino to La Nina autumns or whether it's the El Nino to ENSO neutral autumns. And I think the El Nino to ENSO neutral autumns are the ones to concentrate on. But whatever we look at, there's always a lot of ridging close to us. This one just happens to place a ridging around France and the Bay of Biscay around here, and has the jet stream generally to the north of us. Now, I want to focus on this year, 1983, because in some ways, that is probably the year that we're closest to right now in terms of had the Super Nino. We had a Super Nino in 82, 83, and then instead of going to La Nina through the summer of 1983, it just went back to ENSO neutral during 1983. And I think quite a few of the drivers are in a very similar situation to how they were in 1983 as well, particularly in terms of what the broader Pacific Ocean is doing. So, out of all the analogues, I would suspect 1983 is probably one of the closest matches to where we are right now. And I think when you combine the analogues with the models, we have got a fairly consistent signal here, certainly to be quite a dryish autumn, with a fair amount of anticyclonic influences. So I would suspect we're going to have a dry autumn. I would suspect it's going to be Atlantic driven, with the north and west always tending to get the wettest conditions, the south and east always tending to get the driest conditions through the course of this autumn. I think temperatures are going to come out milder than average as well. So essentially, the broad headline is a mild and dry autumn, or starting warm and fairly dry, and then of course we lose the warmth that you tend to get in September and just become quite mild through October and November. So I would have thought mild and dry is a broad signal. Now, as ever, there's going to be variations to that, and our methodology is very difficult to pinpoint the month by month changes. Our good friend Terry Scoley has indicated the chance of October perhaps being the driest month out of all of this. I think it's going to be between September and October as to which is the driest of the months. But I think November possibly holds the prospect for being the wettest month out of all of this. So it's a fairly consistent signal that I think we're going to have a largely Atlantic driven but quite dry autumn, so that's a fairly unusual combination, and temperatures coming out above average as well, maybe by a degree, perhaps even a bit more than a degree above average across the country. There's not a huge amount there, if you like, snowy conditions, but I would have thought November perhaps, and Terry highlighted this, November perhaps holds a little bit better prospects for some colder incursions. I think November could be more mobile, so we might break down. I think September and October will tend to have quite a lot of ridging. We may break that down quite a bit in November, and it turns into a more wetter, stormier type pattern, perhaps, and that could, excuse me, again, that could bring some colder incursions in from sort of Greenland, Iceland, that sort of area. So that's how it's looking. That's the best I can do for the autumn. As ever, we will evaluate this forecast at the end of the season. We always evaluate our forecast at Gazworthy's, and long-range forecasting is highly experimental. It's not to be relied upon. Just heads up of what we think could, but by no means guarantee, happen through the course of this autumn. So that's it, mild and dry, generally the signal for the autumn of 2016. Come back later on when we're going to have a sneak peek at the winter of 2016-2017. Going to get a few models together. There'll be an old favourite returning for that one, and come back for that later on this afternoon. Right, that's it for now. That rounds up the autumn updates, and next week we're off into the winter updates. That's all for now. Thanks for watching.